the carp. There's some very big carp in that lake.
Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, Living an Unlived Life. This is the fourth video in my Mindset Reset Challenge series, which came about when, in late 2024, I decided to radically change my life by making not one, but a whopping 52 New Year's resolutions. If this is the first time you've watched one of my videos, you can find the introduction to this series here. For this week's activity, I challenged myself to swim across to an island in Lake Burley Griffin. For someone who swims any sort of distance regularly, this doesn't look like much of a challenge, but swimming in that particular area of this lake is fraught with dangers. Plus, as it turned out, there was another, more significant personal problem that I encountered during the swim. Before this challenge, I hadn't swum in the lake for over 30 years, and I'd only swum in this part of the lake once before, 50 years ago, when during a mad moment on a very hot November day, a fellow university student and I were cycling back from the National Library and decided to take off our clothes and jump in for a swim. That time we only paddled around to cool off, but this time my swim would be very different. Man-made Lake Burley Griffin is named after the Chicago architect who won a global competition in 1912 to design Canberra, Australia's new national capital, with the lake a major feature of the plan. While the overall design of the city was decided back then, construction of the lake was delayed for 50 years. It was finally created in 1963 with the completion of the Scrivener Dam, which held back the waters of the Molonglo River. The series of basins that spread over the Molonglo floodplain and form the lake divide the city into north and south. While the lake's function is predominantly aesthetic, the lake is regularly used by boating enthusiasts for rowing, sailing, canoeing and paddleboarding. However, because the water is not particularly nice, few people voluntarily swim there, except on extremely hot summer days, and then they are mostly unsuspecting children. Within the lake are two islands, the smaller Spinnaker Island on the southern side and the larger Springbank Island on the northern side. I was born in Canberra and learnt to swim at a very early age. Because my father was raised in far north Queensland, he spent a lot of time on the coastal beaches, so he knew how important it was for Australian kids to learn to swim. The magnificent Canberra Olympic Pool opened in 1955 and I had my first swimming lessons there a few years later. The dome was added in 1992 and the water heated to make it an all-season facility. I've been swimming a kilometre in the 50-metre pool on almost every morning for the last 15 years. While I regularly swim a kilometre in a nice clean pool, swimming in the lake is vastly different. For a start, the water is much colder, while the top 10 to 20 centimetres warm up from the sun during the day in summer to be about 20 degrees Celsius. Below that top level of water, it is a chilly 10 to 15 degrees. In addition, I would have to wait for a windless morning for my challenge swim because the rough chop on the surface of the lake when it is windy can be savage. Then there was the associated problem of getting a cramp in my legs. While I rarely get cramps, I have occasionally had one in a calf muscle, but in the lake there'd be no side of the pool to hang on to while I stretched out my muscles. So I decided to swim with flippers, which would allow me to kick with one leg on the surface and stay in the warmer water while the cramp eased. Next was the water quality, which is very poor, partly because of the continual load of sediment that is washed down from the headwaters of the Molonglo River any time it rains heavily, and partly because of the regular blooms of toxic blue-green algae across large areas of the lake throughout summer. While coming into contact with the turf of algae wouldn't make me sick immediately, it could make me very sick over the following few days. Added to these concerns was the potential for being hit by a powerboat or rowing shell. While motorised boats are banned from the area where I'd be swimming, there is an exception for rowing coaches who buzz about in little tinnies with noisy outboard motors and may be more focused on watching their crew's performance than on looking for an unexpected swimmer in the water ahead of them. Finally, my major concern was where to start my swim. The shortest distance from the mainland shore to the island shore was about 180 metres, but as an entry point, that area of the lake's edge was particularly foul with reeds. I spent some time trying to find the least worst place, but it all looked quite disgusting. There was a much cleaner entry point from a small pebbly beach next to a jetty at the northwest end of the National Museum. However, this was much further away from the island. It would mean doubling the swim distance from 180 to 360 metres each way. After a lot of agonising and searching along the lake edge, I decided that I'd simply have to swim the longer route. With my route decided, there was only one more thing to do while I waited for the perfect day. The final thing I needed to do was to psych myself up to swimming in the lake again. After decades of mindlessly following a black line in a clean, chlorinated pool, the lake was going to be very different. So on a hot afternoon, I took myself to a designated swim area on the eastern side of Western Park. Getting in was quite a shock. The water felt slimy and it was so murky it was impossible to see more than half a metre underwater. Pulling flippers on was tricky too, and eventually I developed a technique of floating on my back as soon as the water was deep enough and pulling on the flippers that way. I went for a second swim a few days later at Yarralumla Bay. With thickets of foul weed for the first few metres, this place wasn't any better, and I started to seriously regret my decision to take on the swim as one of my 52 challenges for 2025. As the time passed, waiting for the perfect day, my nerves only got worse. Crazily, the stress of my decision drained away my energy, and I could barely swim in the pool each morning. But then the perfect day arrived, and it was now or never. In the early morning of the decided day, I pulled on my togs, collected my towel, and headed to the museum jetty just after dawn. My cameraman arrived soon after and asked me if I still had concerns about the swim.
So you're worried about the water quality?
I am actually. There's been a lot of rain lately and it's stirred it up a lot and it's been very hot. Today's going to be the hottest day of the summer, I think 36, 37 degrees, but the blue-green algae can really be a problem. I'm going to be trying not to drink too much of the water.
And the carp?
The carp. There's some very big carp in that lake. I hope they don't nibble I'll be nibbling my flippers. Another reason for having flippers on, yeah.
Hopefully not too many eels.
No, I think the eels stick around the edges. Not too sure about that.
Like the water rats.
Like the water rats, yeah.
I did a few stretches to loosen up my shoulder muscles and ease my back, then hobbled over the rocks into the water. 50 metres in, all my pre-swim worries dropped away as a new problem emerged. I was having trouble breathing. In the pool, I normally breathe every third stroke to alternate sides for lifting my head up out of the water. This rate of breathing suits my pace for swimming, plus means that my neck and shoulder muscles get an even workout. I swap to breathing on the same side when I'm tired or when I'm pushing myself to swim harder. But the stress of swimming in uncertain waters had put a massive clamp around my ribs, and I felt a great pain in my upper chest. It was a little like indigestion, but I hadn't eaten for over 12 hours, so I knew it wasn't that. Was I about to have a heart attack? I slowed and switched from freestyle to breaststroke so I could breathe faster and more deeply for a while. Then, when I thought I had my breathing under control, I set off again, but I couldn't relax properly and the pain persisted. And so did my worry, which in turn perpetuated the pain. At about 200 metres, I stopped again to gauge how far I'd come and, more importantly, how far I still had to swim. The distance to the island seemed impossibly far away, but I'd come too far to turn back. I had no choice but to keep going. My only consolation was that there was no wind and so no waves yet across the top of the water. After what seemed like a ridiculously long time, but turned out to be my standard swim time of 3 minutes per 100 metres, I made it to the shore of Springbank Island and dragged myself up the muddy bank. Springbank Island was originally part of an extensive rural property of the same name before the entire Molonglo floodplain was inundated by the waters of the rising lake. The western end of the island has picnic facilities with tables, toilets, 2 gas barbecues, tap water and even a tyre swing for the kids. Over the decades, it's been used for a variety of public events, from annual cricket tournaments to theatre performances, but I don't think it is used much anymore, except by people on canoes and random crazy swimmers like me. By the time I'd finished exploring the island, I'd relaxed enough to think that the swim back would be easier. However, in my pre-swim reconnaissance, I hadn't thought about the fact that the early morning sun would be directly in my eyes and that my goggles would fog over to the point where I was swimming almost totally blind. I couldn't remove my goggles to wipe away the condensation because I knew that once they were wet, I'd never get a waterproof seal on them again, and they'd fill up with water. 45 degrees to my right, I could just make out in the far distance the metal pyramid of the Parliament House flagpole, so I fixed that in my eyes as a navigation marker and battled on. At the point when I was finally enjoying myself, the swim was over, but I was happy nevertheless. What I'd conquered was not so much the swim itself, but my fear and the extraordinary stress I'd loaded onto myself. In theory, this exercise cost nothing. However, given my old Speedos were getting a bit saggy, I felt the need to buy a new pair at a cost of $99.99. My pool membership costs me $7.95 a week, or $413.40 a year. This rate is a senior's discount to the normal rate for an adult of $8.90 a day. Plus, after the swim, I took my cameraman out for breakfast at the Farmer's Daughter Cafe in Yarralumla for a total bill of $59. I had the corn fritter stack and my cameraman had eggs Benedict, plus we both had coffee. In my next episode, I take on the third challenge in this series, riding my small trail bike, a Yamaha XT250, up a seriously steep and rocky trail in the nearby Brindabella Mountains. For more information about living your own unlived life, if you go to my website, you can download a copy of my free book, Living Your Unlived Life, Finding Contentment by Honouring Your Dreams. And if it's your thing, you could like this video and subscribe to my channel.